Hey you, thanks for that, for pushing that play button just now. Because you made that choice, we are now rolling. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, but you knew that already. Even if you're new and it's your first time here, you could see that above the button before you hit play, right? And all the rest of y'all who've been around, you knew it was me. Well, I'm so glad you're here. And the real question is, did you get enough pie? Maybe that's specific for those of us in the United States who celebrate the Thanksgiving Day holiday that just happened. And I'm sure some of you just rolled your eyes because it's kind of a terrible holiday built on a lie and white supremacy. I'm aware of that. The origins of the holiday is horrible, but it's also one of the few rituals I have in my life that brings me together with some of my extended family. And the new ritual is to have everyone over to my house, because now that I have a house, the family's been coming here. Except last year, I wasn't home. I was traveling. I was in New Zealand, and I missed it. So it was great to be home and to host some people in my family that I don't get to see very often. And not only was it great to be with those people, but my mother-in-law made 2 glorious pumpkin pies. And you probably wouldn't know this about me, but pumpkin pie is my favorite all-time dessert. More than any other dessert that I have ever tasted, pumpkin pie is dear to my heart. I have already had 3 pieces today, and I've cut myself off. But do I love me some pumpkin pies. And I'm hoping that if you were celebrating, you had a good holiday and it went smooth for you, because we had a really smooth holiday. There was no fights. There was no arguments. I even talked politics with my father-in-law, and it was fine. So I'm hoping everybody else's holiday went well. And if you don't celebrate that holiday, good for you. Maybe just go get some pumpkin pie anyways. I think it's kind of lame that I only eat pumpkin pie this one window of the year. We should be able to eat pumpkin pie all year. And, holidays in general, I sometimes don't like them so much. I would really want for us to be grateful and expressing that every day, not just one day a year, right? So I tell you what, let's just all be grateful every day, and let's eat more pumpkin pie more times of the year. Yeah! On a more serious note, going back to the horrible origins of the holiday, by coincidence, it was only a few weeks ago that one of you listeners emailed me after listening to a conversation I had with Luvina Rangel about cultural appropriation in yoga. Somebody emailed me about whether or not I've ever inquired into any kind of connections between yoga and Native American Indians, that maybe I should look into the indigenous cultures of the lands that I inhabit. And, I have been starting into some of that inquiry. I haven't found much, so I'm kind of putting it out there on a very serious note. If any of you listening to this have any connections to the Native American Indian community, or can point me in any good directions about how I might learn more about that, and maybe in relationship to yoga. I don't know if there is any relationship to yoga. Doesn't matter. Just if any of you out there know some good people to hook me up with where I can educate myself some about the indigenous people of these lands, I'll be very grateful to you. So shoot me an email about that. Now, leaving that for another time, today, Catherine Salin Derrow is here. And if that name didn't ring a bell in your head offhand, you might know her if you read the New York Times article that was published and maybe watched the video in the New York Times Weekly that accompanied it about consent and touch and abuse in the yoga world. That article and video documentary got quite a bit of coverage. Even my father-in-law, who was here over the holiday, the retired Navy admiral, had read that article, and we had some conversation about it. I mentioned to him that I spoke to Catherine from the article, and we had an interesting conversation around that. And if you were here last week, I was talking about how it happened. Someone tagged me in a comment on her Instagram post. I sent her a message. She got back to me, and we jumped on a call. I just want to give you a few things to know before you listen to it. One, there's not a lot of info about Catherine on the internet. She has a kind of soft digital footprint, so I knew very little about her going into the conversation. I also was not able to watch the entire video documentary. I read the article, and I saw a number of clips that Alex O'Dare posted, who's going to be here next week, by the way. But I don't have a Hulu subscription, so I wasn't able to watch the entire New York Times video documentary. So there's a couple of moments in the conversation where I ask her something that was answered in the video. So just to know that there's like a couple of moments where that came up. Also, there have been a few developments since this was recorded. I think I mentioned it last week that one thing that happened since the publication of the article and the video, the company that was working with Johnny Kest, Life Fitness, instituted a new policy to use consent cards in all of their yoga classes. That was a big deal. Also, the yoga center that Johnny Kest originally opened in Detroit is, I believe, closing down, or maybe he's not doing his teaching there. I don't know, but that's sort of ending. I know he's been in partnership with Lifetime Fitness for a while, and in the note that got sent out, they talked about this being an opportunity to finalize the transition, but it seemed to me that it was a fallout from the article. So there certainly has been some impact. Now, the last thing I will say is there are a few moments in this conversation that you will hear I am genuinely flabbergasted. I am taken by surprise by a few things that Catherine says. And I really was in a kind of amazed state through the whole second half, really. But what I'm so glad is I feel that in the end, we really came to an honest place together around some very difficult conversations that we've been having. So I'm super grateful that Catherine went there with me, and I'm glad that you're going to hear it today. Before we do, let me make sure that you are aware of the Gentle is the New Advanced Easing the Pain Tour 2020. I talked about this some while ago. This coming year, I'm doing something new. I am doing a self-managed tour where I am giving 2-day intensives. These are going to be smaller groups, direct connections between me and you, and I'm very excited about it. It's kicking off with a European leg in January. I'm going to be in London, England, January 11th and 12th. I'm going to be in Vienna, Austria, January 15th and 16th. And then I'm going to be in Berlin, Germany, January 18th and 19th. The next leg after that will be here in the States. I will be in Las Cruces, New Mexico, February 8th and 9th. I'll be in Sarasota, Florida, March 21st and 22nd. And I'll be in Austin, Texas, April 11th and 12th. This is going to be fun, my friends, and I would love to see you at any of these events. You can find more about it and register at jbrownyoga.com/tour. That's jbrownyoga.com/tour. Let me also mention that I have a new blog post that I just put out that is about the conversation that I'm having today with Catherine. It's called, Is It Okay If I Touch You? And you might want to go check that out too. After you listen to this, go read the blog too, where I also express some of my views and raise some questions. So I would encourage you to go check that out as well. Okay, I think that's going to be it because we've got a talk to get to, my friends. I will touch base with you on the other side, tell you about what's happening next week. But let's go ahead. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Catherine Salin Derrow.
Hello?
Hello, Catherine, you're here.
Hi.
Hey.
How's it going?
Pretty good. How's it going with you?
Great.
Very cool. Well, here we are. What a trip.
Yeah.
It's funny. I don't usually do these talks in a sort of very like topical way, like headline news kind of way.
Uh-huh.
Because usually they don't post like for like 3 to 5 weeks after I record them. And, I talk about a lot of, I think, pressing issues, but I don't like cover pressing news. Mm-hmm. And I might bump this one up the schedule a little bit just because this is a rare occasion where like you are sort of like fresh in the news. Like I think it was last week that the New York Times article dropped. Is that right?
It dropped a week ago Friday on the web, and then it was in the Sunday, not this past Sunday, but a week ago Sunday in print.
Right. And so, I also had a podcast episode with Donna Farhi come out the same week as the article.
Right. I listened to that.
Oh, so I was like, we were talking about the very, I'm seeing the those convergence of that conversation and that article. And yeah,
there's so much coming out right now. I don't know if you're following any of the stuff with the Oregon Project and Alberto Salazar and all the thing with the running culture as well, with power and consent and women and bodies. And so it's just a lot in the news right now with everything, yoga and fitness and everything else. So
right. So you're saying that, are you in the runner's world too? So you see the same kind of things happening there? Yeah,
I'm a runner as well. So there's a runner who just came out with talking about a very prominent running coach who was not exactly the same, but kind of, just mistreating her in terms of like trying to control her eating and, making comments about her body and,
right. Always trying to make them thinner and thinner. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I just think it's like, it's all of this is about like power and control and bodies and, things like that.
Yes, I know. And honestly, it's a conversation in the yoga world that has become more and more to the forefront because it wasn't so long ago that people weren't talking about this. I don't know how long have you been sort of in the yoga? You're a yoga teacher too, right?
I am. I've been I don't know exactly when I did my teacher training, but it's been about 10 or 11 years. Mm-hmm. But I know that we talked about consent and adjustments and appropriate touch in my yoga teacher training. So it's not a totally new conversation,
And would you say that, like, do you, as a yoga teacher, align with a particular approach or style or tradition, or do you dabble in a lot of different things?
It's sort of changed over the years, but the program that I changed in was an Ashtanga-based program. But I sort of transitioned into more of a vinyasa flow, and now I work for the professional ballet company in Columbus, Ohio, but I actually work through their education arm, and I teach yoga to middle schoolers in a public middle school. So it's more of an all-encompassing, like we teach yoga philosophy and I teach movement, but it's not necessarily like within a particular lineage.
Right. Well, the other place that the conversation around consent's been happening, maybe more than other places, is in the Ashtanga community right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But your program was like Patabi Joyce a figure in it at all or anything like that? Because you said it was like...
we certainly talked about Patabi Joyce. The teacher that I trained under had been to Mysore and had studied with him. Not as much as some of the bigger names, but definitely had been there and studied with him. And so it was part of our training. And
there was also a conversation around consent. That's what I'm saying, because normally there wasn't a conversation around consent happening in the same room, in the Mysore room, you know?
Yeah, well, this was a program that was run by 3 women, one of whom was an Ashtangi, one of whom was more of not a Yengar, but, sort of more Hatha, that style, who trained like under Judith Lassiter. And, I don't know how, but Judith Lassiter has always been very much about consent and asking.
Absolutely. She was permission. Like one of the earliest voices of it when we talked about it when she was on the show. Yeah.
So I think that she probably had a big influence on my teacher, who then brought it into our program. So it's always been something that we've thought about as yoga teachers, and at least the community that I work and teach and practice in.
All right. And so this experience of being in the New York Times, that's got to be kind of crazy, right?
It's super crazy. And the whole thing was, like, I really didn't know what I was getting into, actually, when Katie came up to me and asked to speak to me. I just assumed that she just wanted like a blurb or something. And I don't know. I just didn't really think it was going to be that big of a deal.
Well, wait, let's get to that, because I'm really curious, because she wrote an article about how things sort of played out some for her being at that workshop. But I'm real curious to hear from how things played out for you. So that was at a conference. Is that what it was?
So it's the Asheville Yoga Festival. It was 3 or 4 day festival, depending on how long you decided to go. And I went for 4 days. And Johnny Kest's workshop was actually my very first workshop of the festival. And so if you went on that first day, you did an immersive. So you did like a 4-hour workshop, whereas on the subsequent days, everything was like an hour and a half. So these were meant to be longer, more immersive experiences. And that was the very first one that I did.
And I'm sorry, have you been to that festival before? Was that your first time?
I haven't, actually. I've been to lots of workshops, lots of weekend retreats and things like that, with like one teacher, who's teaching you for the whole weekend. But I've never been to a festival where there's like lots of different teachers the whole weekend. So that was a new experience for me, and I was super excited for it. I met my sister there, and we'd been looking forward to it for months beforehand. So it was a big deal. I
know you got to take time out of your life.
Yeah.
I think I saw you got children too, like to steal the time away. That's not easy.
Yeah. I've got 3 kids and a husband, and it was kind of a big deal. So I was real excited to be there.
All right. And I guess I'm also curious to ask you, even as like a precursor, in your teaching as a yoga teacher, do you do hands-on assisting?
When I first started teaching, I would do a lot more. We definitely learned different types of adjustments and assists when I was in my teacher training. And I have a 500 hour, so I've done the 200 hour, and then I went back, actually not too recently, not that far long ago, and I finished up my 300 hour. So I've definitely learned different types of adjustments, but I'm also a personal trainer, and I'm in my personal training, I don't really touch people. And I've gotten really pretty skillful at verbal alignment cues. And so I primarily rely on that. And then, of course, I teach children now, and I don't touch them at all, because that's just not appropriate in the public school context.
Yeah, I'm asking you about it because I'm curious, like what you're kind of going in there, you're with, what your mindset is as a private teacher, because it was called a hands-on adjustment. Like that was in the title, right? It was
inversions and adjustments, which is kind of an interesting combination. Those things don't necessarily go together. And so the first half was inversions, the second half was adjustments. But I was more interested in inversions, but I was also interested in seeing Johnny because he's kind of a big name, and I've never practiced with him before. I practiced with his brother one time when he came to Columbus. And I just kind of wanted to experience being in his class and seeing what kind of teacher he was. And I like inversions a lot. So I was really interested in that. And yeah, so that's why I signed up.
And how many people would you say were in the room? Do you know? Have an idea? Like, was it big?
It was a packed class. And I felt like it was 40 or 50. I think in the article she said 30. So maybe I was just overestimating. But it was certainly bigger than a usual class that I've been in the past.
And so were you not aware that there was cameras and reporters from the New York Times in there while it was happening?
Oh no, it was very obvious. Everyone had to sign a release when they walked in the door.
So you knew on the way in.
Yeah. And there's a massive boom camera that was, over the whole thing, and they were walking around filming, but they weren't like interacting with people during the reporters. Well, I guess there was only one reporter, but there was about 4 or 5 crew members, and they weren't interacting with the participants during the class. They were just kind of doing their job and filming things. And like I said, it was a 4-hour workshop, so I kind of like forgot they were there.
Yeah, at a certain point, you zoned it out. Your 4 hours workshop. How was the first half? How was the inversion part?
It was fine. I've done lots of inversion workshops, and I used to practice acro yoga quite a bit. So a lot of it was material I had seen before. So it wasn't necessarily innovative, but it was interesting and enjoyable. There was some hands-on stuff there, but nothing that I was uncomfortable with. But again, like doing acro yoga, there were a lot of things that there's a lot that's very hands-on.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I was very comfortable with that. I didn't have a problem with it.
So there's like a lot of partnering going on. Is that what you're saying?
The whole workshop was partnering. So like you worked with another person, and they would demonstrate, do this thing, and then you would partner up and you would do your thing with your partner. So they showed some of that in the, did you watch the weekly?
I watched some of it. Yes. I didn't.
So in the weekly, like there's a part where they show like people on the floor taking their hips side to side, like lifting your hips up, dropping to the other side. Like did that. We did some handstand stuff where you had your hands on someone's hips and they would come up. Another thing where you back bend over another person. So very touchy-feely with the other person.
And were you changing partners, or were you like sticking with the same partner? How did that work?
I stuck with the same partner. I don't know what other people did.
Uh-huh.
I kind of stuck with the same person.
And was it your sister, or did you meet somebody else?
My sister didn't come to that workshop.
Okay.
So it was someone else. It was actually a male. And it actually was someone who lived somewhere in the South, but used to live in Detroit and used to practice with Johnny. And I had noticed as the class was going on that some of the, not talking about the inversion stuff, but once he transitioned over to adjustments, I was kind of clocking in my mind that some of the assists were a little bit, I don't know what the right word is, but like very hands-on, like more like, especially, I don't, if you saw the triangle.
I saw the triangle and the diaper change. So the diaper change. But was there other things, like when did you first start to like have your alarms go off? Like
the triangle one was probably the one that like first really, like I was like, wow. I mean, to put your leg through the hole of triangle, or whatever you want to call it, like the space between the arm and the leg, to me was like, I would never, like, I don't do a lot of hands-on adjustments, but even if I did hands-on adjustments, like I would never do that to another person. Like it just seems like so. Now,
was there also, because I'm curious, is like, what's the purpose? Like, why would you need to do? Did they talk about that? Like, why you're doing it this way? What the goal is, or whatever, or the purpose?
Well, he kept talking about, like he wanted you to be perpendicular to the person that you're adjusting. He kept saying like vertical to your horizontal, which doesn't really make sense because everyone's so
it was like a geometry thing or something.
That's the way he was phrasing it. So like he's saying, the person in triangles in one plane, and then you're like side on to them basically. like your hip, I don't know. But, and then he was saying like, you need to bring the back bend into every pose. So like you stick your leg through and that like gives you leverage to like put one hand on the hip and one hand on the chest and kind of open up the front body so they get the back bend to counter. Like everyone has the habitual pattern of the kind of, kyphotic, posture where you're kind of rounded in your back, So I was like, okay, I get that kind of, but you can sort of also just do that with like a finger and like, because he was also talking about something called press point adjustments where you just like gently touch like one part of their body and say like lengthen into my hand or, whatever. So you could kind of use your words or use a light touch to kind of create that same effect. Now it's not going to be you're not going to be creating that for them, I guess, but I don't know. To me, it was just a lot. And so at that point I asked my partner, I was like, when you practiced with Johnny in Detroit, did he ever ask before he did this to someone? And he said no. And so I was just kind of, it was definitely on my mind. I was definitely thinking about it.
No, so there was no consideration at any point about like consent cards when it comes to doing hands-on adjustments in that hands-on section.
Oh no, not the only thing he said at all was when he was doing the triangle adjustment, he put his hand like basically right on the woman's chest, and then he kind of lifted it off, and he said, "Oh, be careful of the parts you're not supposed to touch." But he never. So because of the adjustments were so. I mean, I don't know. I've heard that in Detroit, it's pretty commonplace because he teaches there, and a lot of the teachers in Detroit are used to it. Mm-hmm. But that style of adjustment is unfamiliar to me, and I've learned from many different teachers. From nationally known teachers, I haven't seen anything that up close and personal. So for me, I felt like I would want to say to someone like, "Okay, I'm going to put my leg here. I'm going to put my hand here. Is that okay?" Not necessarily that the adjustment is wrong, but like maybe a little heads up.
I hear you. Well, what I would say is I don't know what Johnny's age is, but I know that when I first started in like the New York yoga scene in like maybe 94, like from 94 until at least 97, like what he's doing was like the norm. Like,
right.
I remember like, I would have people lay on their stomach and I would stand on their backs and crack their backs. Like we used to do all kinds of really reckless stuff, and it was very commonplace.
Yeah, I've had people lay on me and things like that.
But what I was going to say is like, not anymore. You see what I'm saying? Like, not anymore. Like anybody who's been paying attention, like it's been a long time that I haven't asked someone before I put my hands on them.
Yeah. I agree.
And now I'm really experimenting with the consent cards, because even when you ask, I think sometimes you're not really getting good consent. Anyways, depending.
Well, that was kind of my point, was that like, A, he wasn't asking at all. And B, like, I think there's a big difference between putting a hand on someone's head or a hand on someone's shoulder. And I'm sure you want to get more into it, but in the adjustment that caused me to speak up, which was the diaper change one.
Well, before we get to the diaper change, what I'm curious about is that, like in these, when you're going back and forth with your partners and stuff, could you tell like were the other people around you having those conversations on their own, even though he wasn't telling anybody to have them, like you were? Like,
no, I don't think they were.
No, we're just, banging it out.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for everyone in the room. I know what people said to me afterwards, but I'm sure we can get to that later. But I didn't notice anyone around me having those conversations at all.
Right. And so, okay, so did you do the triangle adjustment on your partner and thread your leg through and do the whole thing?
Yeah, we did that.
And what was that like?
It was weird. Like I didn't want to touch him with my leg, right? So I was like trying to like stick my leg through without touching anything, I don't know. It was weird.
Well, I mean, again, not only that, I don't even teach an extended triangle like that anymore because of how much it tweaked my SI joint over the years.
Yeah.
So even like the alignment side of that aside, the idea that, again, that you're supposed to try to get someone into it more than they would be able to get on their own.
Right. The idea is like to pull their top shoulder to back and their hip to like lengthen and not to necessarily like take them down deeper, but to like take their
to provide them like more
of a back bend. Yeah, right. More back bend. Yeah.
To extend them out more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, whether or not anybody needs to do that to be like happy in their lives or well in their lives is a question. but yeah. I guess in that workshop with all those folks, you do the triangle one. That feels weird, right? And then
it felt, uncomfortable to me.
How many other assists were there before it got to the diaper change?
Honestly, I don't know. Those two were the main ones that to me that stuck out of my mind. And I remember afterward, again, this was, in July and now it's November. So I don't remember everything, but, I definitely remember those two specifically, as being very, much more invasive than I would be uncomfortable. Yeah.
I gotta say, let's go ahead and get to the diaper change because that is perhaps one of the most invasive ones I've ever seen. Like I've seen some pretty, unnecessary like placing of parts of your body against someone. I just remember seeing somebody in a workshop that I was having with folks where they were showing me what another teacher had taught them to do. And like, I believe it was a full like wheel back bend and like supporting the person. And I just said, there's never a reason why my penis needs to be against you.
Yeah.
Like, whatever it is that I might be trying to do to help you as a teacher, there's no reason why my penis needs to be against you. So to me, like, I don't know. So that particular, whatever, I don't know what you call that. That's an adjustment. Like, what pose are you adjusting them in? Is that like a Supta Virasana adjustment or what's the setup?
The diaper change thing?
Yes. What's the setup for diaper change? Why would you be doing
so this is even better that you don't know this because it's supposed to be in Shavasana. So you're supposed to be like, so this is even worse. So like, imagine, so he's demonstrating this in front of a room of people who are all sitting up. The lights are on. We're talking. We're having an exchange, whatever. We don't know what's going to happen, but like he's talking us through it. But for me, while he's saying all of this, I'm imagining that I'm in Shavasana with my eyes closed, lying down, and someone comes up to me and does this to me while I'm meant to be in this relaxed state. And I would just be like, I was like, absolutely not. Like, it would be shocking. It would completely take me out of whatever kind of meditative state I may have been in. And I just couldn't, I don't know. I'd never seen anything like that before. And I was really not in love with it.
Well, was this idea that this was supposed to feel good? Like, what was it supposed to release your back? What was it supposed to do?
So he was like, he asked for a volunteer of someone who normally bends their knees in Shavasana. So, a lot of people have low back pain when they're on their back.
Right.
So they'll bend their knees or they'll put their legs over a bolster or their feet up on a chair or legs up a wall. But instead of doing any of those things, this is what he suggests instead, is to do this.
Wow. So just in case folks listening to this, and there might be a chance that there are folks listening to this who didn't see this video, can you describe what you saw happen in the diaper change? Like what he does?
Sure. So he's kneeling at the feet of someone in Shavasana. They're on their back. And picks their legs up so that their body's in the shape of an L. The legs are perpendicular to the floor. And then continues pressing their feet down towards their face so they're more of in a halasana or a plow pose. And while their hips are lifted, he slides his knees under their backside. So now their hips or bottom are resting on his lap. And then he splits the legs open and wraps the legs around his body and then places his hands on their hip points or low belly. And then while they're in that position, he then rocks his body back and forth and presses on their low belly or abdomen area. And then at one point he was like, well, you know how sometimes you like to put your legs on a chair? And then he takes the legs and throws the legs up over his shoulders.
Oh, over the shoulders. They didn't show that part.
Oh, they did. They did.
Wow.
And puts the legs up over his shoulders. Yeah. And then to get out of it, he just takes them back into plow and slides out. And before he showed this, he did say, this is a little bit intimate. And so, of course, my antenna went up. And I was like, what is he going to do? And then I was flabbergasted, to say the least.
Wow. And at any point in there, other than being flabbergasted by the way that's just an extremely invasive, like, I can't imagine ever, like, there were times in my early teaching where I think I put my hands on people too much, but it was really well-intentioned, you know what I mean? It was just, I didn't know what I was doing, but it was nothing like that, you know? So yeah. I'm thinking of the article that the writer wrote and about them thinking like, I can't believe he's doing this in front of these cameras knowing that we're here.
Oh, yeah.
Did that occur? Well, like he knew that the New York Times and the cameras were there.
Well, I mean, with that in mind, like his wife was in the room, his children were in the room. He has an adult son and some younger, like very young kids, like 10, 11, who were in the room. So then like with that in mind, like you think like, so it doesn't seem like he's not being predatory necessarily, or you tell yourself that's not what's happening. But
wow, but I mean, who knew? That's crazy. So in a sense, clearly he had no sense that wouldn't be a perfectly great thing to do with someone.
Right.
Clearly that's something he's been doing for a long time that's why people enjoy and have given him and thanked him for doing it.
I mean, I can't speak to whether or not people enjoy it or not. I definitely got, like, I didn't like yell out, like, what are you doing? Yeah. You know, like you, when you're in a space like that with all the people around you, like I said, and his family was in there and the cameras are in there, you think like, I guess this is like a thing that we do here, you know? And I had like my sister-in-law commented, you know, she said, you know, I don't do yoga. I guess I'm so glad you spoke up because I would have thought that's just a normal yoga thing to do. Like, you know, if someone is new to the class or someone's never done yoga before, they might just think, oh, I guess this is what yoga is. And maybe that is what yoga is in Detroit. I don't know. But it's not my experience of yoga, and it's not necessarily what I want to experience from someone I don't know, you know?
Okay, so do you speak up right after he demonstrates, or after you guys, do you break off and do you do the diaper change with your partner?
So here's what happens. He says, okay, go do go share, you know, practice this. And I looked at my partner who I'd been working with for the past 4 hours, and we're like, this was towards the very, very end of the workshop. And I said, well, I'm not doing that with you. And you're not doing that to me. Mm-hmm. So, okay. And so then I was just sitting there while everybody else was kind of doing it to each other. And I think I did let a woman come up and ask if she could do it to me. And I think I said yes. But I was just sitting there. And Johnny was kind of wandering around, like, you know, observing and whatnot. And so since I wasn't doing anything,
Were you the only one not doing it?
As far as I know, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I kind of called him to the side and I was like, hey, and you can kind of, there's like little subtitles on the weekly and they kind of catch the background noises of me talking when I'm talking to him one-on-one. But I said, do you ever ask consent when you do this? And he said, no, not really. And I said, if someone did this to me in Shavasana, I would be really surprised and I would not be happy with that. And he said, well, that's an interesting question. Let's bring it to the group. And then that's where he did take it to the group. And he said, hey, everybody, she just asked a question, you know, tell them what you said. I just said exactly what I just said.
Wow, that's crazy. So he brings it out into the group. You ask your question. And I saw the footage of him answering it. It was pretty deflective. He's like, it doesn't work to ask. I was like, what do you mean it doesn't work?
I felt like he was very dismissive at the time. I remember thinking, like, because they kind of edited it a little bit. There wasn't much more conversation. That was pretty much the gist of it, but it was a little bit longer than that. But there were a few people, including myself. He was like, what can you do? And there were several people who said, like, oh, you could do consent cards, or you could put your hand on your heart, or you could do this. And every time someone had a suggestion of a way to ask for consent, he was just like, well, that would never work. You know, he said we couldn't do consent cards because then everyone would see the consent cards. And we couldn't put the hand on the heart because how is he supposed to remember all the people who have their hand on their heart? And one person said something about, what about people with trauma or PTSD? And his wife spoke up, and this is also on the show, and says, like, well, it's good if they have those feelings because maybe they didn't know they had those feelings. And the whole time I'm thinking, and he just straight out says, I don't do any of that. And I remember at the time thinking, well, you know, like he says, like, none of that, how is that supposed to work? Like, there just really isn't a good answer. And I had a lot more to say, but it just felt like it wasn't going to have any kind of impact on him, and it wasn't going to go anywhere except for an argument. And I didn't feel like that was, I don't know, going to be productive, or I don't know. You know, it's a big group of people. It's hard to say more, you know?
So you just didn't keep pressing at some point?
I did not. Like, I kind of, you know, I said my piece, and then I talked about what we do at the studio where I practiced and trained, and you know, just left it at that. And, you know, and afterwards, like with a lot of folks commenting, I kind of feel like maybe I should have said more.
Was there a lot more of the workshop after that? It didn't end like that, did it? What happened after that in the workshop?
There wasn't much left in that workshop. That was pretty close to the end. I think we actually did Shavasana, and then it was over. And then after it was over, I had, and not just then, but like, you know, the workshop, or not the workshop, but the festival continued for like, you know, 3 more days. I had several people, I would say 8 or 9 people who came up to me and said, oh my God, I'm so glad you said something. I really thought that was like such a strange thing. I never would want someone to do that to me. Or, you know, I had several different comments of people who sought me out and found me and made comments, but none of those people raised their hand in the workshop and said, oh, I agree. I would also feel uncomfortable. None of those people spoke up.
And they did the diaper change.
Yep.
They did it. Okay, so people come up to you after and they thank you. And then what happened? You said the reporter came up to you?
Oh, yeah. So Katie came up, like as the workshop, like right as it was ending, we were like packing our stuff up, and she was like, oh, like, I really want to talk to you. And I said, sure, but we didn't have time because we were moving to our next workshop. So she just took my phone number, and like I said, I wasn't thinking it would be a big deal. I guess I knew it was the New York Times, but it didn't really like click in my brain.
I mean, clearly both you and Johnny must have like not really been taking in the fact that this was being recorded and the New York Times was present. Or maybe he does and he's just oblivious, I guess.
I mean, I knew we were being recorded, but like I just didn't, first of all, no one knew why.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know that it was for the weekly. I didn't know.
Yeah. Especially at festivals, people film for the festival.
Yeah, like I thought maybe it was a promotional thing. I didn't
never
really
know,
like.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know. So I didn't like think it was that big of a deal. But
yeah. Okay, so she takes your number, and then what? She talks to you later.
So then there was Kirtan that night, and so we sat next to each other and just chatted. And then after Kirtan, she was like, meet me at this place and we'll do an interview. And I still didn't really click in my brain what she meant. I just assumed it was going to be like I said, like a sentence or two that she was going to throw in web article or whatever. Mm-hmm. But when I got to the restaurant, it was like a totally separate room, and they had this whole thing set up with like 5 crew members or 4 or 5 crew members. And she did like a 45-minute television interview of me, which, only about 2 minutes or less showed up on the show. But,
right.
but it was like a whole thing. It was a lot more than I expected or had any idea was going to happen. So,
what were some of the things she asked you and that you talked about that didn't make it in the segment?
She talked about, what other some of the kind of things that you've asked me, like what are my experiences with other adjustments, my experience with other yoga teachers. She asked me how I felt when I saw it. Why did I speak up? Why did I think I was the only person who spoke up?
Why do you think you were the only person who spoke up? I want to know that one.
I can't answer that question because I don't know the hearts and minds of other people. I mean, I'm not a young person. I'm probably in the same demographic as Johnny. He might be a little bit older than me, but not much. Uh-huh. And and I'm a pretty plain spoken person. I'm most people who know me know that I speak my mind, and I'm not super intimidated by, he's a famous guy and he's well known, but like, he's still just a guy, mm-hmm. He's still just a guy. Yeah. He's still just a guy from Detroit. Right. And I'm just a girl from Ohio. And, he doesn't get to do that to me with my permission. He just doesn't, and like, I didn't think at the time it was such a controversial question because I wasn't saying like, what you're doing is wrong. Mm-hmm. I didn't say that. What I said was, hey, maybe you should ask before you do that, which is not the same thing.
You didn't say, hey man, do you realize that you completely somatically dominated her?
No, I didn't. I did not say that. I did not say that.
You didn't confront him with the fact that he's actually, some people would consider what he was doing abuse.
Some people consider it assault, and they might be right. I can't speak to that because that's not my scope of practice. I would not do that to another person. I think it's invasive. I'm not ready to use that word to describe it, but I'm not saying that that's not it. I think that it's, I think just to be very, very conservative about it, it's just a matter of respect. And like, you don't do that to another person. And it is also, to me, like, it's a question of power. Like, he's trying to demonstrate his power. And if you go back and you look at the video of him talking to me, which I don't remember at the time, but when I look at it, like, he's just touching me the whole time.
I was going to ask you about that because you see, because watching, I mean, I know just from other experiences being involved with like media production that, sometimes things get captured and you can put them together and make it look a certain way. Like, I remember I had like a reality TV show come to my yoga center, and it was just like, you can see how things in an editing room, you can create different realities and stuff. So in that video, in those moments when you were talking and he kept reaching over and touching you, it certainly made me very uncomfortable. What was that like for you? Was that as, I'm sure, uncomfortable for you as it was for me to watch it?
Well, I'll tell you how I felt at the time, which is maybe different than now I just get more and more angry and annoyed every time I watch the video, which has been about 1 million times now. But
if you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.